You're watching the New Stack Makers, a podcast for people who develop, deploy, and manage at-scale software. For more information and articles about at-scale technologies, please visit thenewstack.io. Now enjoy the show.
Infrastructure enables innovation. HashiCorp provides consistent workflows to provision, secure, connect, and run any infrastructure for any application.
Hey everyone, I'm here with Rob Barnes. Now Rob is a developer advocate at HashiCorp, and he just did a demo with us about Consul and really the intentions feature sets in the technology. And it's an interesting story about service mesh overall and what is so permitted for people to do. And with intentions, it provides some guardrails, so to speak. But I want to ask you this question, Rob. How did you get into tech?
How did I get into tech? The short answer to that is, in a previous life, I was actually in project management.
Okay.
I worked for a very well-hated team in an organization called Transport for London. We were responsible for putting up all the camera technology that enforces congestion charge. So anyone that lives in London who has to pay £12 a day to drive through the main city, I worked in a team that put the technology up there. And yeah, really, I just saw a lot of engineers doing their thing to help this effort. And I realized that what they were doing is kind of more what I was interested in.
What you're interested in.
Yeah, and I didn't really like what I was doing anymore. So.
Yeah, what year was that?
Ooh, now you're asking. I'm 38 years old now. I must have been maybe 25.
Wow, you were a youngster.
Something like that, yeah.
A youngster.
Well, I'd like to think so, even though I've lost my hair. You know?
So let's talk about Consul, and let's talk about intent.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, we talked about Consul in the demo, and you explained it there. But for people who are listening to the podcast, can you describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Consul is it's a number of things, right? It's a service mesh. It provides service discovery. It gives a lot of the good stuff that people are used to with that, like mesh gateways and able to connect different meshes up together. It gives a lot of things. There are so many features to it, right? But essentially, one of the things that I really like about Consul is I think a lot of the service meshes are aimed at container technologies, whereas Consul is kind of more flexible. It can be VMs as your workloads. It could be containers. It could be executable. It can be whatever you want it to be.
That's a HashiCorp hallmark.
Yes. Yeah, we try to meet people where they are rather than kind of prescribing to them, oh yeah, you can use our stuff, but you must containerize or you must do this.
Nomad's that way.
Yeah. Again, I love Nomad. I once saw Kelsey Hightower run a demo where he ran Nomad on top of Kubernetes, which is super cool. Go check that out. That was at a previous HashiConf. But yeah, that's one of the things that we do with a lot of our technologies is we try to allow people to use their technologies, their workflows, their way, and to integrate seamlessly with our product stack. And Consul's no exception to that.
So why did you develop intent? What was the reason behind that?
So service intention. So I can't actually speak to who or why I did it. I can just say from my perspective,
great,
why I believe it's so important. So we call it service intentions. Essentially, when we think about the service mesh, it's the one thing that has knowledge of all services across our stack, right? And the good thing is, when we think about the Kubernetes world and the way that the Helm charts are configured to automatically register the services to Consul, that's a form of attestation. You're basically saying that if Kubernetes is running this thing and Kubernetes says this thing is the API service, for example, then we trust Kubernetes with what they're saying. It has its service account and so on and so forth. So we can then assign identity to that. So in a kind of unofficial way, Consul has almost become an identity provider for services, right? So where you have identity for services, and we do this through mutual authentication, mutual TLS, we can actually take it a step further. We can actually decide not only routing traffic, like traffic that comes via this path has to be routed in a certain way. We can do all those things there, which is nice in Consul. But from a security perspective, which is kind of where I'm more concerned, we can actually dictate which services are allowed to speak to one another and which ones are not allowed to speak to one another. A bit like the demo that we did earlier on. We had an API service, a payment service, and a currency service. And the intention is that the API service should only speak to the payment service. Yeah? It should never speak directly to the currency service. The payment service to then speak to the currency service. So we can set up a rule base, which is very similar to firewalls, and we can say, well, this is what we will explicitly allow. We will allow communication from this service to that service. We can even go as far as to say in some circumstances that the communication should flow in a certain direction, right? And I think that's an opportunity that HashiCorp has really taken advantage of when they've looked at the stack and they've thought, you know what, we can actually do a lot more here to make people's lives easier and more secure, which for me is I'm a really big fan of.
What is it? What are the intentions built on? Is it for Kubernetes? I think you mentioned in the demo as a CRD. Is that right? It uses CRD.
Yeah. So okay. So if we speak about, there are so many different ways to do this, right?
Okay.
But we're at KubeCon here. Let's speak about the Kubernetes way of doing things. So anyone that works at Kubernetes is used to manifests, Kubernetes manifests, YAML files, and essentially what you can do is you can describe your console intentions using custom resource definitions, right? So it's just a few lines of code. We can say that to a specific destination, you will allow or deny traffic from a list of sources, right? Or it could be one or many sources. Which I think is super cool. I mean, you can, if you want, you can use the Consul API to define these things. You could also use the Consul UI to define these things. But I think if you're living in this Kubernetes world, if you're already managing and deploying the applications, exactly, you may as well just use the CRDs to do that. I think it just fits into your existing workflows, which is cool. And that's all made possible because we have the Helm chart. It already does service discovery. So the moment you register any services on your Kubernetes cluster, it would automatically register that service on Consul, right? And you don't have to add any annotations or anything like that. It's all out of the box.
Do you keep the Do you keep intentions updated with the current versions of Kubernetes?
So the once you've set the intentions, unless you go in and change
You're responsible
for
your version of Kubernetes to keep it updated.
Exactly. So you've got these CRDs, if you need to make a change, you update your manifest, kubectl apply, and then it will update the intentions. If you want to get rid of them, however, one thing I found is I thought by removing it from the manifest and applying again, it would remove it. That's not the case. What you have to do is you have to actually go to the command line and say kubectl delete service intentions and give it the name. So in our case, it would be currency. And then it will go ahead and do that for you, which is nice, I think.
What's the next evolution of intentions then?
So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the identity side of things. We have a great story in terms of the Kubernetes. If you're not running your workloads on Kubernetes, I think we can do a lot more work in the area to help, assign and attest to identity, so that more things can be brought under this kind of mesh control with intentions. I think at the moment, if I register a service that's not on Kubernetes on Consul, the attestation at the moment is probably that I'm Rob Barnes and someone somewhere trusts me, that if I say that's the case, that's the case. In these low trust or zero trust environments, that's no longer plausible. So we want to trust a platform where we're deploying these things. And Kubernetes is a prime example of that. So I think if we can work on that identity piece a lot more, especially the attestation, I think the industry will really benefit from that.
Attestation?
Yeah.
Why do you think they benefit?
I think we need ways to prove identity, right? So if you look at cloud providers, for example, the way what cloud providers are starting to do is let's take Azure, for example, right? They have something called managed identities. Anytime you deploy a VM or a managed Kubernetes cluster, and hey, I've got a friend that's just there in the background. Anytime you deploy these things, essentially what it's going to do is it's going to assign an identity to it. And because you trust Azure, that this VM is the new stack VM, for example, that identity, we can then use that to attest in other platforms to turn around and say, well, yes, this is in fact the new stack VM, right? But by the way that we do kind of service discovery with Kubernetes, we're saying that we trust when Kubernetes says that this service is in fact the service it is. Attestation is the core building block behind assigning identity. If you cannot attest to an identity, so your attestation is your driving license and your passport, your PIN to your bank account. These are things that only you know. You provide this unique piece of information that attests that you are in fact Alex, and at that point then you have access to the services that you're authorized to do. So I think the attestation piece, whilst it's not a new thing for the industry, I think the challenges have evolved and become newer. Simply because, now our workloads are a lot more dynamic. We're in multiple different clouds and we're using different platforms, and the perimeter is not as well defined as we were used to in the traditional data center world that we all came from 15, 20 years ago. So yeah, I think attestation is one of the key building blocks that the industry has to put some focus in. And we're seeing that from the cloud providers already.
So last question is, what do you think is the future of server mesh overall? We're not hearing as much about it.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions with service mesh. Like I say, I think people feel that if you're using service meshes, it means that you're using containers, right? Whereas, like, I can speak for Consul specifically, that's not the case, right? I think the idea is that if more service meshes out there are to kind of make themselves a bit more flexible, meet people where they are, I think the adoption of service mesh and all the good stuff that comes with it is only going to grow. If you look at things like we have another tool that we call Boundary, which manages session access. The idea is that when you use things like a Jumpbox or a Bastion host, once you're on that target VM, you're then able to jump to unauthorized servers. When you've got things like service mesh in place, then you can turn around and say all traffic has to go via the mesh. That's going to shut down all of our access. So it's just another core building block that pieces this whole thing together. Yeah,
that's its value right there.
So I think what's next for service mesh isn't necessarily the service mesh itself. I think it's people understanding how it fits into the bigger picture. And I think it's an educational piece. And where there's gaps, maybe we as vendors need to make some advances.
How service mesh fits into the larger story.
Exactly.
With services such as intentions.
Yeah, I think intentions is a key thing. I think if other service meshes were to do something like that, their communities would widely adopt it, just like ours have.
That's great. Rob, thank you.
Thank you so much. Great speaking with you.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.